Hi, I'm Mike Taigman, the Improvement Guide with First Watch, and I am here to talk with you about quality improvement in rural EMS. Quality improvement is all about making things better. A little bit about me. I am the Improvement Guide for First Watch, a data analytics and performance improvement support organization that works with EMS, fire, law enforcement, and public health organizations all over the U.S. and Canada. I am also an assistant professor in the program on healthcare administration and interprofessional leadership at the University of California, San Francisco. It's a master's degree program where I teach improvement science to physicians and nurses throughout the U.S. And I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Maryland, Baltimore County, master's degree program in emergency health services management, where I've been teaching improvement science for 23 years. I'm also an improvement advisor with the Institute for Healthcare Improvement and frequently serve as faculty on many of their programs. When it comes to thinking about quality improvement, there are three main buckets that EMS systems need to consider when they think about building their own program. So the first one is kind of the vital signs of your system and organization, basically being able to monitor and look at how performance is doing on things that matter most to you, like cardiac arrests or cardiac chest pain or strokes or major trauma patients, whatever it is in your system and your community that is of most importance. The area of things that you want to improve, things that you're actually making improvements on. So many organizations have quality improvement systems, and I'll visit with them and say, so what have you improved lately? And they look at me like I have three heads. The I part of improvement is actually making things better. And then a small bucket for complaints or investigations or sentinel event kinds of things. So when you stand back and you think about why do patients call 911, what is it they're looking for? And they're looking when they ask for help, they want to not end up dead. They would like to, if they are suffering, feel better. That sometimes somebody collapsed near them. Sometimes they're having a heart attack and need to have an acute intervention in order to be able to survive and do okay. Sometimes they're having a stroke. Sometimes it's a traumatic situation where something bad happened to somebody. Occasionally it is something like sepsis or difficulty breathing. So when you think about these kinds of reasons, and there's also the psychological problems. I forgot to mention those. So when you think about these various manifestations of the reason why people call, there's some common themes. They either don't want to die, they would like to feel better, or something odd has happened to somebody else. And those are the main things. So when it comes to building an improvement system, it's important to focus on the things that really matter, and particularly from the perspective of protecting life and limb and those kinds of things. Another aspect of improvement science is that you want your systems to be reliable. For example, I'm at in my garage here recording this in Santa Barbara, California. And if one of my neighbors were to fall off their bicycle out in front of me, and I called 911, and if they broke their femur so that their patella was touching their crotch, there are some EMS crews that would arrive on scene and say, "Oh, that looks like it's really painful. I'm going to start an IV, give you something for pain," and then kind of watch their eyes to see if their pain's actually been relieved before they start immobilizing them and loading them in the rig. There are probably other crews that would show up and say, "Wow, that looks like it hurts a lot. I'm going to give you something for pain," but not wait for the medication to kick in and just say it's going to hurt a little bit while we package up and load you in the ambulance. There's probably other medics that would show up and just say, "This is going to hurt a little bit. We'll splint you, load you in the back of the ambulance, and give you something for the pain during transport." And there are other medics who would show up and say, "You're a tough person, aren't you? You don't need anything for pain, do you?" and give you a high five and take you to the hospital without giving you any medication. And when I'm live with folks, I would ask you, is that okay with you? And my hope is that you would say, no, that's not okay. The quality of care that a patient gets should be based on the patient's need, not on who shows up to the scene. So in improvement science, we have a framework that we use that was created by a group in Austin, Texas, called the Model for Improvement. And it is a very simple model, but very powerful, and we'll kind of walk through it here. So it starts off with 3 questions at the top. First question is, what are we trying to accomplish? And this is really your aim for your project. And the question is, how much improvement do you want and by when? So you need to have some measures in place, and we'll talk about those in a moment. But you also need a deadline for when you want things to be accomplished. Otherwise, it's just kind of an airy-fairy wish and isn't grounded in actually something you'll hold yourself accountable to. Now, one of the things that is true is just clarifying these first two questions and the answers to them. What are we trying to accomplish, and how much is changes? How we know that changes and improvement can cause you to decide not to do some things that otherwise you might have done. For example, back in the days when we used to think spinal immobilization was a good thing, I was running a paramedic 911 system in Oakland, California, which I know is not rural, even though some people think it's kind of the Wild West. And there was a salesperson that had come through and had visited with my education manager and my clinical manager, and they had shown them this fabulous new cervical collar. And my team came into my office. They were so excited. They wanted me to buy this thing in the worst way. They had to immobilize me in it in my chair and put me on a backboard and spin me around. And they said, "This is great, isn't it?" I said, "That's pretty cool." And they said, "Can we get it? Can we get it? Can we get it?" And I asked the first question. I came back and said, "So what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What are we trying to accomplish?" And their answer was, "Well, better spinal mobilization." And I said, well, back then we believed that better spinal mobilization was good. I know we don't think that as much anymore. But I said, how will we know that change is an improvement? And they looked at me like I had 3 heads. And I said, well, it's been a long time since I went to EMT school. I actually went to EMT school in 1977, my last year of high school. And back then, the reason we immobilized people was so that they didn't move around and end up paraplegic or quadriplegic. So I asked my team, I said, how often in our system do people end up paraplegic or quadriplegic as a result of our care? We show up, they're moving their arms and legs. During our care, we transect their spinal cord, and they end up unable to move their arms or legs. And I said, how often does that happen a month? And they looked at me and was like, well, it doesn't happen that often. I said, well, maybe a month is too short a measurement interval. I said, how many times a year does that happen? And they kind of looked at each other, and the clinical manager had the most experience in the system. She'd been working there for 23 years. She said, I can't remember that ever happening in 23 years. And this new cervical collar they wanted to go to would have cost me $650,000 to add to the system over the collars we were currently using. And I said, so you want me to spend over $500,000 a year to solve a problem that doesn't exist? I don't think we're going to do that. So Steve Jobs actually was famous to say, deciding what not to do is sometimes as important as deciding what to do. So for an aim statement, I'll give you an example. So we had a desire to have a suffering reduction project. A lot of different ways that suffering can manifest itself, whether pain or shortness of breath or nausea or voices in your head saying weird things. But our aim statement was to increase the percentage of patients who have reduced suffering from only 20% of our patients were having a reduction in their suffering based on our care. So the goal was to get it to over 50% by August of the next year. So that next question, how we know that change is an improvement, is about your measures. And your measures, usually think of them in 3 categories. There are outcome measures, What is the result of the process you want to produce? What is a process measure is something that if you do it well will likely produce the outcome. And a balancing measure is something that you want to keep track of because your changes might impact those maybe in a negative way. So the simplest example is cardiac arrest. We all measure cardiac arrest success. So the outcome from cardiac arrest is walking, talking, discharged alive from the hospital, survival. The process measures we know of is that the faster you get CPR started, usually with a bystander or a dispatcher instructed CPR, the better likelihood there is of resuscitation. The better quality of CPR and compressions, the more likelihood there is for a better outcome. And the faster you get somebody defibrillated, the better chance there is for a good outcome. So those are process measures. And then some of you on this may be old enough to remember way back in the late 1980s when they were all excited about high-dose epinephrine. We were given 30 milligram doses of epinephrine to people back then. I could actually get a pulse from my iPhone if I gave it 30 milligrams of epinephrine. And we got a whole bunch of hearts restarted, but we were actually discharging less people alive from the hospital, so that would be a balancing measure. So for our suffering reduction project, the outcome measure was the percentage of patients who have a decrease in their suffering, and this was our baseline measure. So I had 6 months worth of data here. This is a scale from 0 to 100%. And right here it shows that we had 28.5% of our patients were receiving some relief of their suffering based on our care. The process measure was the percentage of people with pain who received a pharmacologic or a non-pharmacologic intervention. So maybe ice, maybe elevation, something like that might be a non-pharmacologic way to treat pain. Immobilization can be as well. Or they received, and back then this was in California, which had pretty limited analgesic opportunities, so it was primarily morphine. The process also was the percentage of people with nausea who received Zofran, antiemetic medication. The balancing measure was the percentage of people who have side effects from the treatment. Both morphine and Zofran have some consequences. And also the number of angry triage nurses, because we were showing up at the hospital with patients who we previously hadn't medicated. If they'd gotten morphine, they had to go back to a bed as opposed to being able to wait in the waiting room. So sometimes we upset some of the nurses in some of the emergency departments. The third part of the model for improvement is what change can we make that will result in improvement. These are your theories, your ideas for what will make things better. And everybody has a theory. And those of you watching this, you can answer the question to yourself. Is the toilet paper roll on the left correct, or is the toilet paper roll on the right correct? And when I've asked this of live audiences, the vast majority have said the one here on the left. And actually, I looked up the U.S. patent for toilet paper, and it does show the over on the left. But those people who say, no, the one on the right is correct, those are usually people with cats or with toddlers who will play with the roll, and if it's on the way it is on the right, it'll stay on the roll, whereas on the left, you'll end up with the entire roll of toilet paper spread all over your bathroom. So the theories for our suffering reduction project was moving from 2 to 4 milligrams of morphine administered early to a weight-based dose. Somebody who's big and fat like me probably needs a higher dose than somebody who's little and skinny like my wife. Another one was pre-medicating people with Zofran before giving morphine, and moving the morphine to the jump kit. In California, all narcotics have to be double locked. So double locked meant they were in the ambulance, and so it would take people a while to go back to the rig to get the narcotics and bring them into the patient. And some crews didn't administer the narcotics because it was too much of a hassle to get them. So we switched and created a double locking system in the jump bag so it could be taken in with folks. And then the last part of the model for improvement is where you test your change ideas. And this is done through, it's called a plan, do, study, act cycle. This is a process for doing little fast experiments of change, small fast tests of these ideas. Now, this is not a place to do research on patients. I want to make that clear distinction. Research needs investigational review board approval. You need to be associated with the university usually in order to be able to do that effectively. And you want to make sure patients have informed consent and are protected in the process. This is only testing things that science has been proven to be helpful and maybe something you just haven't implemented in your own system yet. So the first part of the plan phase for the Plan, Do, Study, Act cycle is you want to make a prediction for what do you think is going to happen when you try whatever it is you're going to try. The next part is you actually carry out your experiment. So if your prediction is that a weight-based dose of morphine will relieve pain faster and decrease the need for being redosed, great. Then for our experiment, we tried it with just one paramedic on one patient. Adrian, who was a medic who was aggressive with managing pain. We said on the next patient, calculate a weight-based dose of morphine and give that in your first round. And then in the study phase, you compare your results with your prediction. So our prediction was that pain would be relieved faster and the patient wouldn't need subsequent doses. And the first patient, the pain was relieved quickly, didn't need subsequent doses, so it was like that was a good test. So then you have a choice in the ACT phase of you either adopt the change and move on to the next test of change, you adapt it, or you abandon it. So in this case, we decided to adopt it and expand it to her entire station. So all 6 medics who were assigned out of her station tried it, and we gave it to a couple of dozen patients over the next week. And what we found was while we were relieving pain more effectively, we were making a number of people nauseated from the morphine dose, which is not a benefit. Many people will tell you that nausea is worse than pain. So what we decided to do was to adapt and pre-medicate people with Zofran before giving them the morphine and tested that change. And we tested that change and found out that we were able to reduce their pain quickly, radically decrease the number of redosing of morphine that needed to happen, and we weren't making people nauseated anymore with that change. So that was something we managed to adopt and made that protocol change clear across our system. And as part of that result, we were able to take the number of people who got a reduction in their suffering from 30% to 54%, which is the kind of improvement you're looking for in performance improvement. Now, I know some of you are looking at this and go, wait a minute, there's all these people up here that are suffering that you haven't successfully cared for yet. And when you analyze the data, the majority of these people have behavioral health emergencies. They're having hearing voices and having psychotic episodes. And we didn't have good interventions to be able to treat those back when I was running the system. Now they have a new sublingual medication that dramatically reduces the intensity of the voices or the psychological disturbances of an acute psychiatric emergency. So when it comes to analyzing your data, it's really important to understand just a little bit of improvement statistics. So often people will say, wow, things are going up, yay, or down, no, and this next slide is the most important bit of statistics that you will ever learn as an EMS leader or a rural EMS leader. And that is, given 2 different numbers, one will be larger. Are you taking notes on this? Are you writing this down? You should be writing this down. It's the most vital piece of information I'm sharing in this entire presentation. And some of you are rolling your eyes going, really? One number being bigger than another number? And the reason I share it like this is because throughout your life, you have read hundreds of newspaper articles, seen television news shows, and probably made these analyses that yourself, where you draw a grand conclusion based on one number being bigger than another number. And more often than not, it really has no relevance to anything significant. So when we go to analyzing data and your performance data in your EMS system, there are so many different ways you can analyze it. I encourage you not to spend much time with pie charts. pie charts. So this is the most popular thing to do in an emergency. Update your Facebook status. Got the largest slice. Not very helpful. The world's leading expert on data display for performance improvement, Edgar Tufte. He said the only thing worse than a pie chart is several of them. This is the only pie chart I have actually found useful. The percentage of pie I've eaten versus the percentage of pie I have not eaten. Bar charts occasionally can be helpful. This is the only bar chart that really is very interesting to me. When it comes to improvement science data, what you want is you want to plot your data in its naturally occurring time order on a line chart. And so you have your measurement on this axis and its naturally occurring time order on this axis. So I'll give you an example. Back when I lived and worked in Florida, I lived about a half hour from our office, and I would get up in the morning and I would fire up my my Harley little sporty 1200 Custom and ride to work in the morning. And I decided to plot the time it took me to get from my house to the office, and it averaged 30 minutes. Sometimes it would go up, sometimes it would go down a little bit, and there's a little bit of bouncing around and variation here. And remember what I said earlier about one number being bigger than another number? You know, so my boss could have said, hey, today you got here in 28 minutes. Yesterday it took you 35 minutes. What happened? And when somebody who is senior to you in an organization asks you a question about what's going on, you will come up with an answer that is rational, reasonable, sounds reliable, and is 100% fabricated BS and doesn't have any relationship to anything. You'll say you caught all the lights red yesterday, you got them green today, or whatever. And the reality is all processes have this little bit of variation. The blood pressure that you have while you're watching this video right now is not the same as the blood pressure when you woke up this morning. And it's not the same as the blood pressure you'll have when you go to sleep tonight. That goes up and down with variation, and that is known as common cause variation. Common cause variation means that it is just an inherent part of the process. And the question as a leader that you get to ask of common cause variation is our performance around this good enough? Now, one morning I was riding my motorcycle to work, and I came up to a red light at an intersection. There was a little Toyota pickup truck going the northbound direction. I was driving southbound this direction. And the pickup truck blew through the red light and got double broadsided, got broadsided on both the driver's side and the passenger's compartment by cars from each end there. So I, turned off my bike and put my kickstand down and went over to assess the situation while other people were calling 911. And the driver of the pickup truck was unconscious with snoring respirations. I reached in and could feel a little bit of crepitus on his chest from a pneumothorax, and reached down and felt an unstable pelvis. So he was hurt pretty badly, and he was wearing an EMT uniform. He was one of my employees who had gotten off a night shift and apparently had fallen asleep and driven through the red light, which is a whole nother lecture in performance improvement conversation around fatigue. We got him out of the rig, loaded him up in the Bayflight helicopter. I used to fly part-time as a flight medic for them. So I jumped in with the crew and we headed off to Bayfront Medical Center and got him into the operating room, and he got his chest tube. We vented his chest during transport. Got him into the emergency department. They put in a chest tube, took him off to the OR to do the stabilization of his pelvis. And that day, it took me, because I got a ride back to my motorcycle from a sheriff in the emergency department, it took me over 2 hours to get to work. So that is what is called special cause variation. Special cause variation is that variation that is outside of the normal process for whatever it is you're producing. And when it comes to understanding data, there's a couple of things to pay attention to that can identify special cause variation. Remember, common cause variation is that variation that's just inherent in a process. And the question you get to ask of common cause variation is this good enough? With special cause variation, something outside the process happened, and you get to ask the question, what happened here? So when you get an astronomical point way above or way below the rest of the data, or you do make it a control chart and give yourself an upper and lower control limit. If you get a point above the upper control limit or below the lower control limit, you have special cause variation, and that is a question that you can ask is, what happened here? Also, if you get a trend, and a trend, and many people use the word trend inappropriately from a statistical perspective. From a statistical perspective, a trend is 6 or more consecutive data points that are ascending or descending. That means that something has changed in the process to cause a change in performance, and you can ask, what happened here? Or there's something called a run, which is a shift of 8 or more data points above the center line or below the center line. When you get 8 in a row, that is called a run, and that is a special cause. And when you're trying to make something better, you're actually trying to cause a run in your data. So if you are trying to decrease the number of complaints for your crew's driving habits, seeing them get lower here would be an improvement. If you're trying to improve your cardiac arrest resuscitation and you change to an automatic CPR device and see your performance drop off here, you have actually created harm in your system, and through your data you'll want to know that. There are a number of good books and references that you can use to learn more about improvement science. These are 2 of my favorites. The Improvement Guide is the textbook that I use in many of my graduate school courses. And the 4th Generation Management is a good way to think about kind of the leadership perspective around using data science effectively to make good leadership decisions. So this has been a quick run through improvement science. There's a lot more information. If you want articles on the topic, resources, you got a question about some project you're working on, anything, please email me at mtaigman@firstwatch.net. At any point in time, I'd be glad to help you out. Thank you very much for listening.